Welcome everyone to our episode 83. I am with my guest, my honor guest, Leah, and we are going to talk about, are you a parent or a child? The dark side of parentification. Leah Morris is going to give us a perspective on how we really approach these kind of concepts in terms of the emotional wounds that many of us share. So I'm going to just present my guest with her background. So Leah Morris is a life and relationship transition coach and the founder of Life Remade, a holistic personal coaching service with a lifetime of experience and 5 years as a professional coach. She specializes in guiding people as they move through both short-term and long-term life transitions. Leah holds a bachelor's in organizational communication, is a certified transformational life coach, and a certified hypnosis practitioner. Largely driven by her core value of integrity, she has expanded beyond her own coaching practice. Now she also leads a team of international coaches with varying backgrounds and acts as a bridge by matching clients with the most aligned life remade coach on her team. So as you can see, she has a very deep background in all of these transitioning states, how we really navigate through our emotions, through our life, and through all the ups and downs that we will have. So thank you, Leah, for being here, for being in the podcast. And I know that we will have an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for having me. I love the topic that we've chosen. I think that we're going to be able to sort of unveil a lot of insight around that. And also, as you were sort of explaining my background, I started thinking about how I arrived at doing such work,
Mm.
and that it can be, rooted in or stem from the topic we're talking about today, which is parentification in a lot of ways. So very excited to dive into that topic with you.
Thank you, Leah. So let's begin with that. Let's begin with the story of how did you arrive to this kind of transition of helping people to transition during the most reckoning moments of their lives.
Mm. Reckoning, I love that word. And transitions, can happen in a multitude of ways. That we can go through them daily. We can have really big moments in our lives, like you know death of a loved one, or divorce, or moving or changing careers, or getting into a new relationship. There are all types of transitory moments in our lives that do provide us that pause, if we're open to it, to look around and to see what needs to be done and to get clarity. I arrived here at doing this work because of my own divorce that I was going through, and really just asking myself, you know, what is it, one, that I need most right now? I needed some guidance. I needed to know that I wasn't alone. I needed um, to create a new vision for my life. And I also needed to understand how I got in that space to begin with, and understanding the patterns that brought me there, to that time in my life, because it wasn't fun. And so I really wanted to figure out, how did I arrive here, so that I can learn the most possible from this experience and this failed relationship. Um, but to be honest, I think my journey to doing what I do now really did start from when I was around 4 years old. And my parents were going through their own divorce. And I remember it's just this core memory in my mind of when that was all happening. I remember my mother calling me into her room on an afternoon, and we were sitting on the couch in her room, and I was 4, so very little. And I remember just her crying onto me and the tears sort of hitting my arm, and really kind of forming this thought in my mind that I need to get her through this time. She can't do this without me. And in fact, I think those were at times the words that were used were, I don't think I could get through this without you. And little did she know at that time I really believed that word for word. And I thought it's my responsibility to help carry the emotional toll that this is creating on the family and be like the mediator of sorts. And so it became my life's role is to play that. And ever since then, I think it's unfolded in a variety of ways, positively and negatively, and ultimately has landed me here in a really healthy space of providing that type of guidance and support in a way that feels good for me as well.
Wow. Yeah, I really can relate to that story as well, because I also experienced some kind of parentification with my mother as well, and also seeing her like she was arguing constantly with my father. She didn't have the support that she needed, and knowing the other side of the emotional wounds that she was having, but receiving them as a child is such a very um, traumatic experience, let's say. You don't see it like that when you are a child. You just take up the responsibility, as you mentioned, but you um, start pushing yourself to be more mature, even though you are not. So you are forcing your brain to really make those connections and make those sense of the things that are happening. And suddenly you realize that you are not a child anymore, and you have another role, and then you have responsibilities. And then since you are very, very young, you lose a lot of things in terms of the freedom that is to be a child, you know? And I think that these are the kind of wounds that many people can share, not in terms of this parentification that probably not all of them have, but we always have certain kind of childhood wounds, and all of those are the ones that we start dragging when we are adults, and we don't explain ourselves how we are attracting certain kind of people that reflect the kind of victims that we need to rescue many times. So I think that's the kind of let's say a springboard that you have when you just come up as an adult and you bring these kind of victimhood people, that you are attracting them because you know that you can help them, because your role has been most of your life to help other people to do whatever they want to do. And that's why probably during your development, a lot of people approach to you and tell you their problems, and that's just the way it goes, you know?
I used to joke all the time that I had a sign on my forehead that said, "Tell me all your problems." Because for whatever reason, I think, as a 4-year-old and developing and figuring out how do I position myself in a way that makes me, that allows other people to feel like I am a safe place to vent to, because that's what I thought I could do best to receive a sense of belonging and love from my own family. And so, of course, having that sort of energy out in the world, people are drawn to you. Even, obviously there was no sign on my head, but
Mm.
there is that simple recognition of someone who is willing to carry other people's um, emotional weight.
Yeah, the burden of what they have been through.
Mhm.
No, I also think that when we are in that kind of search or journey to find out why we are doing that, is just when we recognize that we are not responsible for anyone else's but ourselves.
Mhm.
And that's also something that people have to, well, mostly the people that are people pleasers or people trying to help everyone, they have to realize that they are not responsible for that, even though they were given that kind of load since a very early stage. We are not anymore, and we can just let go of that
Mhm.
weight, as you mentioned, because that is something that can drag you into very negative spirals, no?
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, yeah. And I think when you finally discover the difference between what is your responsibility to own and hold and work through and what someone else's is, that can create a whole different, way of existing, because all of a sudden you're needing to draw boundaries and you're needing to figure out the appropriate place to put things and to hold people accountable for some things that maybe you weren't doing before, and to have the hard conversations. So yeah, it's a whole journey for sure. And I'm definitely just kind of reflecting back on a lot of the relationships I've had, friendships, romantic partnerships. You can kind of see the pattern looking back. I think it was Steve Jobs that said, you notice that you can connect the dots from the past, but not the future, or something like that, where it's easier to sort of look back and say, this all made sense looking back now, but while you're in it, there's just a lot of figuring out and it doesn't quite make sense. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, you are struggling with those things. I mean, you really don't realize that because that's just the way it is for you.
mhm,
For you,
mhm,
it's just normal. For you, it's just like you should be able to do that. And also, I think part of the symptoms of this parentification is that we also develop a extremely high sense of responsibility, and then this kind of responsibility also make us act as an adult, even though we are a child, even though we are a teenager. And now when you are an adult, you try to um, sometimes you try to control people into making them more responsible,
mhm,
but sometimes you don't understand that they are not like that because they were not raised like you.
mhm,
So they are never going to realize what is a sense of responsibility such as yourself, because you
mhm,
are just given that role since you were 5 6 years old, no?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've seen in my past, at least a couple times, with people that I've um, been in romantic relationship with, is substance abuse problems or addictions, and
Mm.
um, feeling like when you're in partnership with somebody who suffers from substance abuse or addiction, there is typically that want to help, to heal them, to do whatever it takes to get them to a better space. um and which is also what creates a lot of those enabling dynamics and the codependency that comes up. Um, but ultimately, it is, someone else's responsibility to really manage their own journey and take responsibility for what they can, and to do some figuring out themselves, and to put themselves in a position of receiving support and help. So um, I think those relationships taught me the most about what that parentification can really become um, when it's not dealt with in a healthy way, and when it's gone a little under the radar in terms of, like I was saying, knowing what is my responsibility and what isn't, and what can I hold other people accountable for versus what's mine.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I just remember a friend commentary from high school that I just gather up again with some of them, and she told me that I have always been an adult, a small adult in my life. So since that time, since those high school friends, they already identify me as an adult, even though I was a teenager or a child still,
Hmm.
because I have to grow up quickly,
Mhm.
to be responsible of my brother, to be responsible of the fights between my parents, to be responsible of uh, not money, because I didn't work, but I started to work very, very early. So all of those things are the ones that mark you for your life,
Mhm.
and many times you don't realize that that is just a ticking bomb in
Yeah.
terms of the emotions that you have inside, and in terms of the things that probably you project to other people, no?
Yes, absolutely. What I mean, now I'm curious about when did you really come to terms with what was actually going on for you?
It was mostly when my parents finally decided to separate,
Wow.
that I had like the space to realize, and I also suddenly felt better, because I was not witnessing discussions, and I was not uh, in a toxic relationship with my father. Uh, I I have time to process everything, and that's why when I started to dive deep into everything that I could understand about emotions.
So I'm curious now, how did you really come to terms with your patterns and become aware of, what it was that was happening in your life with the parentification?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, it was just when my parents got separated that have time to process everything, because I suddenly realized that I didn't have to uh, have a toxic relationship that I already had with my father, and I was not a witness anymore of many of the struggles. Actually, my father approached to me and told me that he decided to separate from my mom, and I just congratulate him,
Mhm.
because I said it's about time that you really start doing what you know how to do.
Mm.
I still believe in you, but I think that that is the best for both of you. And of course, my mother was um, sad also in that grief period of losing a relationship, because they lasted 23, 22 years of
Wow.
marriage. Um, but I was just beginning my bachelor's degree, more or less. I was 21, 20 years.
Mm.
So I was in the beginning of the bachelor's degree. And that's when I started to go really, really deep into understanding my emotions, understanding what happened, understanding I had a lot of anger inside of me. I still had a lot of um, um, resentment about the things that happened because I felt that I was robbed of a
Yeah.
very big part of something that I was supposed to be freer, no?
Yeah.
Was supposed to be lighter. And but then I realized that I have to process that anger to transform uh, my life in terms of understanding why it happened, and not in terms of knowing what happened with them, because I already knew that was part of the parentification, but in
Mhm.
terms of what was happening with me along the process, no? So what
Mhm.
changed in me?
Mhm. I can relate to a lot of that too. And just hearing you speak, it's almost as if you were the third party in the marriage the whole time,
Yeah,
and not the child, but the you were part of that. You experienced the toxicity of their relationship with them. And yeah, and sort of understanding that as you were experiencing that, yeah, what was that creating internally for you? How is that making you, how's it shaping the things that you believed about yourself and the world around you and what relationships consist of? I can relate to all of that for sure. And there are things that I think when you're in that, the the act of the parentification as the child, you really do just kind of take it as this is how it is,
yeah,
because there is no other reality for you at that time. This is what reality is. And so it's so interesting that, it took into your 20s, um, and the separation of your parents to finally see, like, wait a minute, maybe there is a different reality here that I'm just not aware of.
a different way to live, a different. Well, I was not a child anymore, but but I had things that I have to process in terms of, mostly in terms of forgiveness. I think that was a very, very difficult time in terms of forgiving all of those things, and still trying to shut down sometimes my parents, because they were separated already, but sometimes they still complain about the things that happen. And I just said, I am not able to listen to that anymore, because it already happened. You are
Mhm.
already apart. So why are you still speaking about those things? No? And
Mhm.
I have listened to those things 20 years. So leave them. I don't need to listen anymore of those things, no? But
Mhm.
that's something that parents don't understand in terms of permeating all of that pain into the child, into the person, into your daughter or your son, because that is extremely difficult for them to realize that it is not their fault
Mhm.
that they got separated, and it is not their fault whatever their parents experience. It is just their own journey, their own story, their own lives, and it's
Mhm.
difficult to process all of that, because you you start that's when I started to become not obsessed, but like very thorough about identifying patterns, and
Mhm.
identifying patterns of things. And that helped me a lot in terms of my own life, because I knew quickly when I was in a pattern that was not helpful for me.
Mhm.
No.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. I feel like sometimes some of the things you're saying, I'm like, me too, me too, me too.
Yeah.
This whole, yeah, the pattern recognition, and really, and I think that that's one of the gifts that came out of the experience, right? Is like, it's not all negative. It definitely um taught me how to be curious and
Mhm.
to pay really close attention to the little nuances of other people's feelings and emotions too. And I think it's one of my superpowers now to be able to see people really clearly when they're in really dark moments, especially. And I think building, resilience off of that too, how to be adaptable, how to really pay attention to your surroundings, and also your what's going on internally, was something that I learned later in life, because my focus was so outward all the time.
Mm.
um but there were definitely gifts that came from all that, along with the grief that you mentioned too. And I think one of the big questions you know I still am working out some forgiveness with is, during those times in my life. So my aha moment, my moment of really realizing what was all going on didn't happen until I was about 30. So from 4 years old to 30, that was, my brain was just kind of default running at in that, I need to be responsible for mediating everything. And even though my parents were divorced at 4 years old, it was always a conversation about how upset each of them are at each other, even after they got remarried. And I finally realized at 30, like, wait a minute, how come no one asked me how I was doing that whole time?
Mm.
Because I always wondered, after that moment, how did I lose touch with my feelings so much? How did I get to a place in my life where I ended up in a very toxic marriage myself, and I never checked in with myself? Like, why did I not ask myself if I was okay? And that led me to all these questions of, I don't know if anyone's really ever asked me if I'm okay, and why is that, and where were my feelings as I was developing, and how do I regain connection to those feelings and to that wisdom, so that I can do things that are better for me and take more responsibility of my life. But that's a big one that I'm still working on, and I have found a lot of forgiveness in other ways. But yeah, grief around what that child version of me needed.
Mm.
um so yeah.
Yeah, it is difficult to detach. I narrate a story in the book that I have behind that sometimes you have to travel. I call it time travel to your past, but as an adult, and just witness you as a child and trying to live, well, not trying to live, but trying to see the situations from here, from up, and seeing that they are just three persons in the game. There are two that are having a conflict, an internal emotional conflict, because of their own childhoods also. That's why it's a generation of things.
Mhm.
And you as a witness, you are
Mhm.
just there receiving the toxicity.
Mhm.
But as you mentioned, that kind of being witness, I think that's what develops internally in the brain some pathways that now you can have that superpower that you mentioned, that you are like watching and witnessing the patterns in pretty much everything that you do and that happens. Because now that this pandemic happened, I already have a lot of vision of what was behind all the things that were happening.
Mm.
And I talk with a lot of friends and I talk with a lot of people. This is what happened, what is happening. Try to explain them as much as possible, and they many times they told me, and how are you able to see that so clearly? I said, because I don't buy into the screen. I don't buy into the facade of people, no, into the masks of people. And I try to see beyond. That's why sometimes I ask tough questions or difficult questions, because I know that when I really know people, when they really tell me how they are or what they feel, is how I can know them better quickly, no, and avoid sometimes pain.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to like another aspect of this too, which is I can't remember where I quite read it, but something that I take a lot of pride in, as you're saying too, is really seeing things really clearly and being a witness and observing and knowing people as soon as I can, so that I can often avoid unpredictability and pain and things like that. And that definitely I've learned about myself is a strength and a coping strategy, a defense mechanism, so to speak.
Yeah.
And really learning how to relax into also just letting things unfold has been a practice that I've had to continually devote myself to. And maybe I won't know it all, maybe I won't see it all, maybe, you know what I mean, and not
Yeah.
creating meaning behind everything that I possibly can, even though it is something that I'm most experienced at doing. It's relearning, like, how do I exist as a human in a more surrendering, less anxious state, and less hypervigilance and more flow, and letting things unfold. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense. It makes sense a lot, because I also do that. I am in that hyper mode of sometimes trying to control, and sometimes trying to know more, and to dig deeper, and it's draining. It's draining many times, and you have, as you mentioned, you have to just stop and let go, and what I have learned to cope with that is to listen more to my body. I I have, since I began doing meditations and experiencing more that place of reflection, it has helped me a lot to process many of the physical symptoms very quickly. So I already know when, for example, when I am over exercising, when I am eating something that is not particularly healthy for me, although many people can eat those kind of things. Sometimes I just feel that it didn't felt well in my stomach, and I can just process the pain in my body with a lot of surrendering attitude, in terms of just um, acknowledging the pain, trying to look for the reason in terms of the emotions, in terms of were the emotions that I have while I was eating or during that day, because that helped me a lot to understand why I develop sometimes a stomach ache, or sometimes a fever, or sometimes whatever it is. No.
Yeah, that body awareness was my first step back into myself as well, and has been such a huge companion now for me in my journey of, like, what are you telling you, what am I telling me right now, what needs to be heard and felt. And because I think with a default to really attune to everyone else and to hold the burden or hold the space for everyone else, I really did lose touch with those little feelings that were popping up for me. And so really changing the focus to the body and those sensory things really helped me to ground into and center myself around what's true for me and what, what it is that I'm experiencing. Um, and over time, I think building just that deeper relationship with self through that body awareness, now it's just second nature to really be able to, inquire within and to reflect, self-reflect. So, but it is with that body awareness. I think when I was first discovering that was in yoga. And I remember, hadn't really done a lot of yoga before, but I had started doing it in the midst of my own divorce.
Mm.
And I remember just laying on the wooden floor of the yoga studio and breathing, and I could feel my like my chest cavity beating with my heart. Sometimes you can feel that when your blood's pumping a lot. And I remember thinking, this is the first time I'm really feeling my heart beating. And I just laid there and listened and felt it. And I started to get more curious about what other sensations, like my breath, maybe there's an ache in my head or my belly feeling a certain way. All signals, all signals. So how did you first start like dipping your toe into that body awareness?
That was before. That was like probably also around the time that that my parents got separated. I realized that exercise for me was a release of the tension, was a release of the stress, but was a release mostly of the emotions. Because as soon as I started to do exercise, I just suddenly was in my place where I was supposed to be when I was a child, probably.
Oh.
I felt really happy. I was always smiling. I was always happy. I remember a lot a friend of the gym that she told me, "Why are you always so happy?" And I said, "Because I am doing what I love." And I said,
Mm.
I love exercise. It was like my companion in terms of releasing all of that stress, and I was just in my zone.
Love that.
And
Yeah.
also I try to focus a lot of things in terms of the anger, for example, that I have in the exercise. So I like to swim a lot. So during swimming, my
Mhm.
friends also recognize, did you have a bad day? And I said, yes, so just leave me at the beginning, please. And I just swam very, very quickly, and that's the way I release everything.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, it's boxing.
Oh,
When I'm having anger or anything come up, I've found that like some something about releasing through my arms and my hands, that energy that's pent up feels really therapeutic and good for my mental state, emotional state. It's just this almost like, yeah, pushing away. And you hear about animals doing this with their pent up energy, the shaking,
yeah.
and having those movements come up for them as part of their natural way to process what's coming up. So it makes sense that it would be the same for us.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that's also when I started to link things suddenly, because it was like eating right or knowing what to eat, and listening to the body, which is just in the same category, the metabolism, the exercise. So that's why when I started to link things, and I said, well, this is just a concept that has to be a circle so that you really feel good, so that you really make that, I say, me time,
Mhm.
the me time that you have, and the spaces that is just untouchable,
Mhm.
that you need to either meditate, either do your exercise, either do your journaling. And those are the times that now I defend with a lot of devotion, let's
Yeah.
say, no, because
Mhm.
I know that without those times, I probably won't be in my best shape, no?
Mhm. Yeah. Sort of that reparenting, so to speak, of like, okay, what does David need right now,
Yeah.
to be feeling his best? And maybe that is the movement, or maybe that is the journaling, or whatever it may be. And really tuning into yourself. Like, that's what I've found for me, is that I'm like essentially reparenting myself to attune to my own emotions and give myself what I need, and to be devoted, to be that devoted reparent to myself. And I think in a way it really does help with the forgiveness aspect of things, and understanding that they too are human and probably could use some reparenting of their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
It is. And I think, I don't know, but there is one thing that just came up to my mind about silence. For me, being in silence is extremely helpful because that's when I have the most peace, and I like my own spaces. I also try as much as possible to isolate at certain periods of the day where
Mhm.
I just don't want to be with anyone around, and in almost complete silence, and just thinking, just trying to breathe more or feel more. and
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
think that that is also a sequel of those reparenting techniques that you develop, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And the silence, I love too. I think it's just being, with no agenda, with no one to consider, just to be. And I think as children, that is like, that's what we see, you know, children really thriving in, is like, go ahead and just be, do what you need to do, and be in your own world. And as adults, especially parentified adults, I think we need that. We absolutely need that. And I think that's where my creativity has really blossomed too, is really being able to come back to that inner child again, and to reparent in all of the ways that we've mentioned today.
Yes, yes, it is a whole process. It is something that even people that haven't suffered from that parentification, I think that everyone, as human beings, we certainly now realize more that being in silence, being at peace with you, being doing whatever you want to do in that time, but having that space, that block of time, is is what brings you into alignment with yourself, into that best self that you can be. And that's probably the reason of why in these hectic societies, and people don't function, because they don't. The first excuse that I usually listen from many of my clients and the people around me is, I don't have time. And I said,
Mm.
why are you saying that? That's because, well, for me, saying that is saying that you don't love yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you love yourself, you have time for you.
Yes.
No?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I picture like that inner child. Like, you wouldn't say like, I don't have time to spend
Yeah.
time with you. I don't have time to love you. I don't have time to care for you and to be with you. That is just flat out saying, I don't care for you. I don't love you. I don't think
Yeah.
you deserve that. So, saying that about yourself and your own life, and the things that you need the most in that me time, it really is a deeper issue there. It's like, you know, what part of you, and why do you feel like you don't deserve that time? And like, kind of dealing with those belief systems around that. and how to sort of create a new belief system of not only are you deserving of that time, but that's time that you enjoy giving to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So what would it be the best advice for people that suffer from this parentification, or for general public, in terms of reparenting ourselves? Because we all need this reparenting, in spite of being a witness of this um, conflict and turmoil between your parents or not. You and everyone, I dare to say that more than 99% of people have suffered some kind of neglect, some kind of thing in their childhood. So what would you say to them, so that we can give them a strong message?
Mm. Yeah, I think well, I guess this comes to mind. Um, Something that my therapist years ago, where I no longer work with this particular therapist, but she told me something because I was asking, how do I prevent myself from continuing to be in this pattern of uh, over functioning in everyone else's lives and losing touch with myself? And she said, it's, it's a practice, but here's three questions that you can, ask yourself if you're making decisions, or if you're um, trying to navigate certain situations. And I've repeated these three questions over and over. um, am I choosing this because I feel obligated? Am I choosing this because I feel responsible for someone else's feelings? Or am I choosing this because I just don't want to create conflict, and I feel bad, so I'm going to make a decision based on any of those three? If it's a yes, I would say you are not aligned with what's truest for you. You're not attuned to your own needs. These are decision making processes that you're using that are based on things outside of you. Feeling guilty for, or feeling like you owe it to somebody else, or feeling like you're going to sort of martyr yourself and sacrifice your own needs so to keep the peace or to make other people happy. These are all internal red flags for you to say, come back to yourself. And ask your maybe inner child what it is that you need instead, and be silent, with the things that need to come up for you. But yeah, those three kind of key points, or those three signifiers, are a really good time to pause. And if you can, just say no. If those are the reasons why you're choosing something, it's probably a no. But if at the very least, just pause and ask yourself, well, what would I choose for me? If there was no obligation, if there was no guilt, if there was no personal responsibility that I have over someone else's feelings, what would I choose? How would I take responsibility for myself and my own needs?
Well, those are very, very good questions, so that people can just by listening to them. I was just reflecting back in a lot of times and a lot of situations, and I think that just having them in your radar is going to awaken your intuition, in terms of feeling more what doesn't align with you, and just listening more to your heart, listening more to your own feelings. And as you mentioned, your inner child is speaking, and it's time to listen more to him or her, because we really need to make contact with that part of our lives now.
Yeah,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Leah. Thank you
Thank you.
for this conversation. It was really, really moving. A lot of emotions were experienced through the conversation. And I think that we are going to help a lot of people, because I know for sure that many of us need these kind of reflections, guidance, and things to relate to. And if anyone that is listening needs to reflect more, listen to this podcast more times, more than once, because sometimes it is not at the first time, it is at the second that you really pick up the messages more, and do the exercises that probably around the conversation we drop, in terms of how we overcome many of those situations. And where do people can find you in your network?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, liferemade.com. But I am pretty active on Instagram, which is my name, Leah E. Morris. And I also send out a monthly newsletter that generally just has some good topics of conversation, just like this one, where you can sort of reflect. And generally, there's an exercise or activity that you can do as well. But I love working with people one-on-one. So if this calls to you, or if any of my content calls to you, and you feel that sort of intuitive nudge to reach out, I definitely encourage you to do so. And I'd be happy to connect with anybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And just give us a like, give us a comment, give us a question, and spread the information, because we really need to help to create and cultivate a new generation. Thank you for everything. Bye.